Welcome to the ADHD and Me podcast. I'm your host, ADHD Girl, and today's episode is all about understanding AuDHD. With there being lots of misconceptions out there about autism and ADHD, you can only imagine what it's like to have AuDHD, but the diagnostic figure for it is on the rise. Joining us is Steph, whose son has been waiting since the beginning of primary school for a combined diagnosis. And we talk about the importance of empowerment within a diagnosis. Stay tuned. So welcome, Steph, to the ADHD and Me podcast. Would you like to start by sharing your own experience of ADHD and AuDHD and a little bit about your background and what your kind of situation is at the moment?
Yeah, basically, I was a teacher for 25 years, helped setting up an SEN department, and have worked a lot with children with additional needs. So I've got quite a kind of detailed background in terms of experience and understanding and training. But when my son was born almost 14 years ago, very early on, there were signs that he saw the world in a different way than most. And he really struggled with emotional regulation. He would get very angry, he would explode, he would kind of go from one extreme to the other in terms of emotions. And I always really kind of was going down the autistic route rather than the ADHD route, because from my experience, he definitely fitted the criteria for autism.
Because that's more linked to the emotional regulation. Even though you can have emotional dysregulation with both, it tends to be autism, the one that's more focused around the emotional regulation, isn't it?
Absolutely. And very much the fairness, if things weren't deemed as fair in his mind, then, he would really struggle with that. And he was also he still is very literal with his language. I mean, he's incredibly articulate, but his interpretation of events and what people say can be quite literal. So I'd always gone down the autistic route of thinking. I did raise it at nursery, so, from a very early age. And they were brilliant and understood the kind of process and said at this age, really, they would just be making notes because that's what would be asked to be done first. So we kind of kept a handbook, which was great. But obviously at that age, it's very difficult to really do anything about it unless they are extreme, in terms of nonverbal or quite unusual behaviours that would be deemed as quite easily kind of observed. Whereas because my background, I was just hyper aware of it, I think.
Yes.
And then when we started school, by year 2, Wynne was saying things like he wanted to hit his head against a brick wall till he died. So there was a lot of mental health kind of issues going on from that as well. So we were referred to CAMS and bounced back from them, and they recommended doing a complex case review at the Child Development Centre, which is what we did. But because of my experience being more independent at school rather than state sector, I didn't know the process. I was kind of new to it. So I was kind of led by the school. But what I hadn't realised was that school hadn't given the same level of detail as I had. So when the CDC looked at it, they decided not to assess.
Well, this is the kind of frustrations that are faced by parents, isn't it?
Absolutely, because the problem with that is that I'm somebody who understands the education sector. A layperson doesn't. If I found it incredibly difficult and frustrating, then somebody who isn't in that background or have that, kind of understanding or support behind them, it's even harder.
Absolutely.
We ended up having to do a early help review, and I did a 12-week parenting course just because I was prepared to jump through any hoop to try and get support.
Which most parents are. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. I think that's the biggest misconception.
Yeah, that parents don't care.
You wouldn't go through this process. You wouldn't put yourself through this and your children through this if you really didn't believe that they needed support.
It's too off-putting, isn't it? It requires too much energy.
Absolutely. And I think one of the biggest things that I have an issue with that I feel needs looking at is the fact that school have to see what you see at home. I know it has changed slightly, but still,
it's to do with like masking, isn't it? And Like going back to what you were saying about unless it's extreme, at an early age for the additional needs, it's children who have moderate additional needs who are able to mask a lot more in schools, especially when they have that structure and routine. And it's why so many children get missed, particularly if they're academic as well.
Well, this is the thing. Win is highly academic. So unfortunately, he is seen to be okay. And any kind of difficulties are not seen in the same way as a child who is not, say, as academic at that point in time.
Unfortunately, we know I mean, obviously, I'm a former teacher as well, so I know you understand this, that the pressure that schools are under in terms of exam results, in terms of getting those grades, means that, unfortunately, if your child can hit the mark, regardless of how much they struggle apart from that, then they're not given as much precedent as another child who doesn't hit that mark, who's struggling with the same kind of things.
Absolutely. And I think the thing is that what was quite obvious with Win was that when we went into lockdown, Win couldn't cope at home working. So he was in school because I was in school myself. And that is when he thrived, because he knew where to go on the playground. He didn't have to have his big sister looking for him, trying to find friends for him. He knew what was expected in the classroom. It was small groups. It was tailored much more to him, which to me, sends alarm bells going off, because it's kind of like, well, if a child thrived in lockdown, being in that environment, you kind of think, well, this is telling us something. So in the end, we got to year 5 and Win started with emotional based school avoidance. He has severe anxiety around school. He wants to be in school. He's desperate to be seen as, quote, normal. Not that there is a norm, but he really struggled with that kind of thing. So in year 6, we referred again, because obviously you have to wait for a period of time, even though it's a long time in a child's life.
And it's frustrating when you know there's something there and it's not being picked up on.
Exactly. And I think that the problem is that parents trust schools. And I'm not saying that schools aren't trustworthy, but the paperwork, you need to look at yourself after it's been filled in by the school to make sure that all the things that you've been told as a parent through parents' evenings, through reports, all of those things are actually down there.
Yes.
You can't write it for them, but you can raise all the issues that they brought to your attention, which they may not realise are traits of autism or ADHD. And it was actually yourself who helped me with that, because you have a great understanding of ADHD. It was you that actually said, do you realise that a lot of this is also kind of traits of ADHD? And that's when we went down the ADHD and autism referral. Now, what I don't understand is that every county is different. So a friend of mine is an advisor for another county, and they have to go through CAMS to get an assessment. Whereas here, you have to go to the Child Development Centre to get an assessment. So nowhere is the same.
No. And my friend had an issue with this as well, because her children, she's a foster parent like me, and her children went to school in a different area, borough, the one that the children were living in. So my friend was in this situation where the Senko didn't know how to refer because it wasn't their job within that particular borough. And this is what we talk about with the postcode lottery
And it is so difficult because everywhere is different. So there's not a clear process. Where I am, I could do a referral. Well, it was school that referred, but I kind of made sure that all the information was in there this time. And it was the same paperwork went in for both ADHD and autism. And from that, what tends to happen is, because ADHD is more easily diagnosed, because you can have a QB test, because you can have medication, things like that, that's what gets looked at first. Because once you've got the ADHD under control, you quite often then see the autistic traits much more obviously, which makes sense. But the problem with that is that if your child, like mine, is kind of very used to using technology, is an intelligent person, is academic, is articulate, and can hyper focus, then when it came to the QB test, which is online, he was within the normal range. So if you're within the normal range, then that goes against you.
Let's not forget as well that the QB test was set up to diagnose ADHD, and there's been no wider research on how that's counterbalanced out if someone also has autism. So there's actually no research on how autism and ADHD interact on that QB test.
Exactly. And it's a one kind of thing fits, one assessment fits everyone. Now, my argument was that I didn't feel that that was reflective. And I was very lucky that the consultant I saw listened to me and in the end put Wynne on a medication trial because of kind of some of the information from school was contradictory. But the detailed form screened ADHD and autism, that she was prepared to trial him with the medication. And the medication was revolutionary.
Wow. So just goes to show you were right all along.
Absolutely. And you don't ever want to put your children on medication if you don't need to, because who would want that? But it did make his emotional regulation was much better in the fact that rather than 0 to 100, we say 0 to 80. So you could round it off. You could avoid the extremes, which obviously has an impact on their relationships with other people and all those kind of things. And we're still going down the pathway, waiting for the multidisciplinary team meeting about whether Wynne meets the criteria for an ASD diagnosis. Now, Wynne is now over halfway through year 9 and starts his GCSEs, in September, his years. Well,
it's ridiculous, isn't it, considering that you brought this up when he started nursery. Well, you knew even before then, but you actually started this kind of process of, okay, let's do something at nursery. And here you are, he's nearly, how old do you say, 14?
Yeah, he'd be 14.
You're not even at the end of that journey yet.
And this is the problem. And because every kind of council seems to do things differently or have a different pathway, there's a lot of misunderstanding around because people's experiences are so different.
And I know some boroughs, won't actually assess for ADHD and autism at the same time, as in you can't be on both pathways. You've got to go down one or the other, which means that you could be waiting like 7 years in total. And that's if you put the other paperwork in straight after the other. So there's no one route for a combined diagnosis.
And the thing is with that is that we now know that a lot of people who have ADHD are also autistic. And a lot of people who have autism also have ADHD. So in that respect, we now have a title that combines the two. And yet we don't have a diagnosis or a pathway that understands that they can overlap, and quite often do. So the information that would be sent in about one is the same information that will be sent in about the other pathway. So
it's making it more complicated, isn't it? Because you're having to you're kind of going down 2 different pathways when actually they should be the same.
Yeah. And I mean, I am lucky in that respect that it's one set of paperwork. I have sent a lot more information in since with how it meets the criteria, those kind of things. But unfortunately, there are not enough people working in the kind of additional needs areas into, whatever they're deemed as or named as in across the country. So the waiting list is unfortunately incredibly long.
And it's a very under-researched area, isn't it, as well? So.
Yes, obviously, unfortunately, we have the attendance issue as well. And because there's such a major push on attendance for schools, that is what the main focus has been on, rather than on kind of what his needs are. It's been looked at through an attendance lens rather than through a how can we meet need lens. And I understand that that's unfortunately because of the pressures on schools.
But it doesn't make it any easier for you in terms of having to try and deal with
it. And I think also there's not enough out there for children who are either have ADHD or autism or both, who are also academic, because it is seen as, well, they can manage in school, but it's having such a major impact on their mental health.
Yeah, and you've touched on something so real here that it's almost deemed that if you are academic or if you're of a certain intelligence and you have a learning difficulties, and this is for adults as well, that you can just get on with it. So it's almost like we're trying to tell people to mask. Like, get on with it. You're intelligent. You can overcome these obstacles. Well, actually, no. And the amount of mental energy it takes to overcome those obstacles is much more than it takes a neurotypical person.
And that's the biggest thing. And I think that's why so many, especially women who are hitting menopause, those kind of things, are realizing that actually they don't necessarily have depression. They don't necessarily have anxiety. That they may, but they're not necessarily the driving force behind it. It's the fact that we've been expected by society to behave a certain way that we have done. But actually, once the mask starts to drop, it's exhaustion, you know, and you don't
start dropping the balls. It's only then that you start thinking, actually, what's going on here?
And also, because we understand so much more now, we have our children, we know that whether they are struggling, things like that, that makes you look at yourself, because a lot of things are hereditary. They come from somewhere. And I've looked at myself, and okay, self-diagnosis is dangerous to some extent, but as an awareness, I now understand myself so much more, because I didn't think that I was on the spectrum. I didn't think that I had ADHD, but because I've looked into it so much because of him, I can go, do you know what? Actually, yes. But what that's done for me, and I think does for a lot of people kind of our age, is that it's a validation and it's an understanding. It's not, I need a diagnosis. It's not I need to tick a box. I want to be popular, you know, and have this new craze. It's nothing like that. But it's a finally understanding yourself and realizing there's nothing wrong with you.
This is why I am this way. And actually, that's okay.
Absolutely. And I think that this is really important. I was talking about this the other day with Senko. When we got his ADHD diagnosis, obviously, you don't want to have ADHD. You don't want to have autism purely because it's not seen as the norm. And you don't want anyone to have to
and the amount
fight
of struggle with it.
Exactly. But what was interesting was that whilst it was a little bit soul destroying because finally we know what it is, it's a bit of a I don't know, you kind of go, oh, but at the same time, what it did was it validated who he was in his own mind. And whilst he didn't really want anyone to know about his diagnosis, apart from obviously those who needed to, he didn't want anyone else to know, his mates and things like that, because he didn't want to appear different. But the difference in himself was huge, because he finally accepted that there was nothing wrong with him. It was just he saw the world slightly differently. And I think that if we hopefully get the autistic diagnosis, the same will happen again. And I think that actually there will be much more of this, I know who I am now, and I'm okay with that, because there's nothing actually wrong with me. You know, I'm not to this or to that. It's a weird kind of realization, but it's suddenly a validation of all those years that, yes, this is just the way I see the world and there's nothing wrong with that. Oh, it's all good. So we've ended up going down the EHCP referral route, which I had to do as a parent. And that was, again, the assessment was refused because it was deemed that he didn't have the need.
Because he was academic and could hit all the targets pretty much.
And so I had to go to mediation. Now, it was overturned, mediation, and we did have an assessment. We had an ed psych out, and that was all great. But again, the EHCP was refused in the end, which is fine if school can meet need, which includes the recommendations from the ed psych. But unfortunately, because funding is so tight these days, and I think what a lot of people don't know is that when all these things come in from government, you know, and it's like, oh, we're going to give this much money here and that and all the rest of it, schools have to find a lot of that money from the budget they've already got. It's never all given.
I was actually going to touch on the political basis for this, because one of the things you're saying about the EHCPs and schools being able to meet needs, if you've got a good school, then that's great, you know, that can meet their needs and all the rest of it. But if you've got a school that's not capable of meeting the needs, the EHCP is one of the only ways to legally guarantee that they have their needs met. Now, one of the things the government are currently trying to bring in with the new white paper is, as you say, they're trying to say this much funding is going into it, which some of it does come out the school budget, but they're also trying to get rid of EHCPs in mainstream schools and just turn them into individual education plans, which again don't offer the same legal protection. So it's based on what you're saying, and I know the experience of a lot of wider parents, it's almost like we're going backwards.
I think the thing is, with education, you always go around a cycle. The way that things were taught, we've gone back round the cycle of topic-based, of this and that and all that. I mean, if you've been in education long enough, you will have seen it all 100 times. And it's the same with additional needs, with SEN. We are doing the same as we used to, where you would have statements and you would have school action and school action plus. They're all renamed. The problem is that we have so many people deciding what should happen in education without actually putting educators at the heart of it, in my opinion, because I don't think you should be able to make any rules up or any recommendations unless you have taught in a school. We started the process in year 2. We're now in year 9. You know, that's 7 years. That's a huge amount of his, not only school life, but actual kind of living life. It's a long time. And had he had the correct diagnosis at a much younger age, when children are much more amenable and accepting of each other, it would have made a massive difference.
And one of the things I wanted to ask you as well, touch on briefly, the amount it's taken from you as a parent, you know, because obviously I've been kind of with you on some of this journey, not all of it. So it's been quite a journey for you, hasn't it?
Oh, it's exhausting. You know, I mean, as a parent, you will never stop advocating for your child, ever. But at the same time, it is exhausting because you are constantly fighting to be listened to be believed, for your child to be believed. And all you really want is someone to say to you, I believe you. You know, and let's work together to find a way to support your child.
It all comes down, doesn't it, to empowerment. It's empowering the person with it. It's empowering the people around them to support that person and giving them the tools.
Yeah, absolutely. Because at the end of the day, it's not about the name, the label ADHD or the name autism or AuDHD, whatever. It's not about that. It's about knowing that if somebody has ADHD or autism or both, these are ways to support them. These are tools to support them. These are things to look out for. These are ways to ask them questions. For example, being very literal, Wynne was asked, so do you feel anxious about school? His answer, no. So then, it's a choice. No, it's not a choice. But because it was a closed question to a very literal child, when I went, tell me about school, what do you feel about school, giving open-ended questions, his response was, I dread school. Well, that's a lot,
and that's actually quite a niche thing you picked up on, because you find that a lot with children with additional needs, where they kind of answer differently based on open-ended questions and closed-ended questions, and that's not something that's widely discussed.
Well, it's purely because of the literal interpretation of the question. Because with him, if I say anxiety, the way I've explained it is that it's when you have a feeling that's so overwhelming that you're not able to do something. Well, to him, he went, but I did go to school that day. So therefore, it doesn't fit the actual definition. So I wasn't anxious. And this is why it's so difficult. And this is why, as a former teacher, open-ended questions are the key to finding out anything. Closed questions don't give you information, really. So in that respect, it's not about a label. It's not about even a diagnosis in a way. It's about, as you say, it's about empowering that person to understand themselves and to know where to find support for things that they may find difficult. And I think that is the key to it. It's about all parents want is to be believed, to be listened to, and to be working together to help as much as possible.
Yeah, that brings me on nicely, because talking about the right tools, I know that you, an amazingly gifted woman, because you're not just like, you know, fighting all this on behalf of your son and trying to get him the support he needs, but you actually own like a woman's wellness brand where you do multiple different things to empower women. So you're actually not just talking the talk, you're walking the walk. And one of the things you've developed, which I was so interested in, was a planner. Now, I know it's not specifically aimed at neurodivergent people, but it's such a powerful tool in terms of understanding yourself that it can be so useful for that. Sorry, I feel like I'm telling this story for you. Do you want to explain a little bit more about it yourself?
Yeah, I think that to me, I've started with women and children because obviously I'm a female, but I will at some point roll out to boys and men. But I think I need to do a lot more research in terms of how to kind of roll that out. But it started really because I have a daughter myself as well. And obviously I'm female, and I, through WIN, have understood myself. Whereas as a child, I was too sensitive, I was too shy, I was too this, too that. Actually, no, I'm none of that. It's the way that my brain works is a very ND way. Even without a diagnosis, I don't need one, but it has made me understand and appreciate things. And I struggled with depression and anxiety around a few things. And on my journey, I had CBT and found it to be quite revolutionary because not only did it give me tools, but along the way, it made me realize even more so that my traits of ADHD and autism have a huge bearing on the way I see the world and how I internalize things. And, you know, the word we've used a lot today is about empowerment.
Yes.
I want to empower women. I want to empower girls. I want them to not get to the age I am, which is, 48 when I had my CBT, to finally accept themselves and finally understand themselves.
That's so powerful.
There's so much out there. There's so much self-help out there that it's like, well, yeah, it's another thing. But for me, the difference with this is that obviously it isn't CBT. And, I have to be very careful there in the fact that if anybody is struggling, that they need to get professional support and help. But what this is it's a planner, and it follows a pattern which is predictable, should we say, in terms of every day, which then helps the ND mind because it's not something new to deal with every single day. It's got a repetition to it in terms of it helps you to notice how you're feeling and what it is that you need that day. It also takes you on a journey of awareness all the way through to learning about boundaries, to hopefully by the end of this kind of 52-week program, to actually return to yourself. Because as women, we don't need to discover ourselves because we are who we are, but we forget ourselves, we lose ourselves. And it's about returning to who we are. Yeah, returning to who we are and being empowered that we are absolutely and utterly perfect as we are. Obviously, that's not the best word because none of us are perfect and we can always learn and change, but there's nothing wrong with us. There's nothing wrong with who we are as people, but we lose ourselves. And it's about returning to who we are and noticing who we are and being able to kind of take ourselves out of different experiences and be able to manage ourselves. And for girls especially, it's about not returning to themselves because they haven't found themselves yet, but finding out who they are and finding their voice. Yeah. And for women, it's returning and listening to that voice and trusting that voice again.
Wow.
So to me, it's a very quick thing to do because it has a pattern to it, which does help the neurodivergent mind because there's not an overwhelm, which with other kind of things, journaling, things like that, I find really difficult. Because
this is going to be available on Amazon at some point in the near future, hopefully.
Yeah. Hopefully, yes. It will get there. We're in the trial kind of position at the moment. But what I want it to be is I want it to be something you can do each day very quickly that gives you a sense of empowerment, that gives you that sense of, I know what it is I need. I know where I am. I need to be kind to myself. What do I need today?
Thank you so much. This has been a really interesting conversation. I think people will get a lot from it. It seems to be that if somebody is academic or of a certain level of intelligence, then the premise is they can't really struggle that much. It's stereotypes like that can do lots of harm for those of us who are neurodivergent, even when it comes to getting a diagnosis. Join us next time where we'll be chatting to a mental health practitioner who works in the NHS about the benefits of therapy for ADHDers and other neurodivergent conditions. Take care, ADHDers and allies.